and I'm joined this morning by Dean Emeritus of the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences at the University of Manitoba, Dr. Michael Trevan. How are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing very well. A little bit lonely today because Francesca's off sick, or she might just be hiding from the fact that me and her were having a discussion, or her and I should say, were having a discussion about tomatoes and how do we know, even with fresh produce in the store, that these things haven't taken up bits and bobs from the soil that maybe we don't want to consume, and that sort of led us on to genetically modified food. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more. Firstly off, am I right, or is Francesca right, or is it somewhere in between when it comes to the soil and what the plant uptakes?
Well, it's sort of somewhere in between, because plants have to take stuff from the soil in order to be able to grow. Now, there are some plants where you've got to be maybe a bit more careful than you otherwise would. For example, rice is pretty good at picking up arsenic from the soil, if there's any there. Flax is also pretty good at picking up cadmium from the soil. So in places like Manitoba, where there is a high level of cadmium in the soil, you can't grow flax there.
Okay.
And of course, and wine producers, of course, they depend upon the soil to give a particular trait to the wine or the grapes they're growing to make a difference to the flavour of the wine they produce.
Okay, and obviously cadmium is radioactive, essentially, so that's not something you want to consume. But when it comes to wine, do these have an effect on our body, or is it nothing big and it really just sort of changes the flavour?
No, they don't have any effect on our body in that sense. It just affects the flavour. And it might possibly be the same with the tomato, but most of the tomatoes' flavour, or rather with a lot of modern tomatoes, lack of it, is due to the fact that the growers are trying to produce perfectly round, red, ripe, not soggy tomatoes that, if you cut them across the middle, will have three little what they call locules, which are the sort of the segments inside the tomato. And in doing so, they manage to remove most of the decent flavour.
Right, I see. Because that's genetically modified engineering, right? When they're sort of changing the shape of the food. So when did that sort of first get introduced?
When the tomato was first discovered, way back in about the 16th century, by the Spanish in the Andes. In South America, when it was a tiny little, very bitter, hard, and sort of greeny yellow fruit. And they thought, oh, this looks nice, and it wasn't. But they introduced it into the agricultural system, and over the years, farmers managed to breed better tasting tomatoes. But it wasn't really until the 19th century that tomato caught on as a possible food. Ordinary plant breeding is a way in which you can introduce a gene from one strain of a plant into another. So if one doesn't grow very well, but it's got plenty of flavour, you can look for the genes in that plant and transfer it. And what the traditional process is, you simply mix the pollen of one plant with the flower of another and hope for the best, and then plant out hundreds of little plantlets and let them grow and see what sort of tomato they produce. So it's a bit of a long-winded process.
Well, it's fascinating to think that you think of genetically modified foods and you think sort of the late sort of 20th century, but you're saying sort of this sort of idea came around sort of the 16th century, a long time ago, and has actually been going on for a lot longer.
Yeah, and I mean, for all of agriculture, it's been going on for thousands of years. If you looked at what the grass was that we get modern corn or maize from, it's a scrubby little thing, and you really wouldn't want to eat it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I like the tomatoes as they are now. They're not too bad. I like the ones I personally grow. And when it's like sort of the seeds you buy from a store, are they still part of that genetically modified sort of crop, or are they more sort of organic and natural? Because you can get the difference between organic and natural seeds, and they label it for you. Is there much of a difference?
Well, the organic seeds have been grown under organic growth conditions. There are other seeds which are just being grown normally with fertilizers and pesticides on the plant before the seed develops. And then there are seeds that you can get that will be possibly genetically modified by a process of specifically taking a one single gene from somewhere and putting it into a plant, or actually taking the plant you've got and deleting a gene from it. And that's what they did with the original genetically modified tomato.
Fascinating. Oh, that's really good to know. I mean, for a plant, the day isn't too long, but it is for Katie St. Germain. You're listening to TKR Mornings with our guest, Dr. Michael Trevan, and he's going to help us understand more about our foods and what we put into our body. We'll be back after these.